Okay, just before I get started, I just have a couple of caveats. This is not color management training. This is not color science at all. This is just tricks and tips. This is very basic color tricks and tips for science shops. This is not expert kind of stuff. This is just basic stuff. My name is Dean Derhack, by the way. I've been in this industry now for 25 plus years. No, just kidding. Hasn't been that long. It feels that long though, doesn't it? I've been a product manager for both Onyx Poster Shop as well as Flexi Sign Pro. So I spent a lot of time talking to sign shops and print shops about their color challenges. And I imagine there are sign shops that have figured this stuff out, and there's some sign shops that are still struggling with it. So I'm not exactly sure where you guys are on that spectrum. I don't want to talk below anybody or above anybody, but I'm just going to give you these tricks and tips that I've come across. So this is just the basics. Just started. You've got a printer, and you're struggling with some color challenges. Let's just kind of talk about these. So these are the typical things when I go visit a sign shop that's struggling with color. This is typically what I hear. There's a lot of sad stories. It all comes down to these three things. They're struggling with color consistency, right? Consistency is getting the same color over time. Predictability is knowing what kind of color you're going to get before you actually use your ink and media to print. And then spot color matching can be very, very difficult for shops. And I've got some tricks and tips that might make that a little bit easier for you. So, is anyone identify with this? Does anyone struggle? No? Maybe a little? Okay. All right, so let me go through these tips here. First of all, the biggest challenge I see sign shops actually have in improving their color is actually improving their color. In other words, actually doing something about it. Sign shops like to complain about color challenges, but then they don't actually change anything in their color workflow to solve those color challenges. And so I always remind the shops that ink is very expensive. Ink costs more than blood. It's very, very expensive. This slide here is actually 5 or 6 years old, and you can see here we're talking 70 cents here. There's blood at 40 cents. So it's pretty expensive. We can say the same thing about media, right? Your per square foot cost is pretty expensive. So the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, how much is bad color costing you? How often are you printing and then the customer rejects the print? How much ink and media are you spending just trying to figure out how to get the right color? Is one of the most valuable commodities that sign shops have is their time, right? You spend an hour trying to get the color right, and you finally get it right, but you've just blown an hour in your shop, right? To the point where you might actually be afraid to take on challenging color jobs just because you're afraid of how much it's going to cost you in time, let alone ink and media to get this job right, right? Time is a very valuable thing. And also sign shops, they have, some sign shops have a hard time charging their time. They don't charge for design time, and they don't charge if there's problems with color, miscommunication with the customer. And so that leads to missed opportunities, right? If you're worried about color, if you're stressing every day about color. So I'm gonna tell you how to use your settings. We're going to talk about how to get better output consistency and predictability, and then I'm going to show you some really cool tricks and tips how to easily spot and match. Okay? But we first need to talk about what good color is. Which one of these is the right color? Which one of these is the good color? A couple of these look blown out. One of these is supposed to be awesome. It's what the customer wants. The other ones aren't. How do I know? What is good color? When something comes off your printer, how do you know that it's good color versus bad color? It's whatever the customer is willing to pay for it. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter the delta E, it doesn't matter the LAB values. At the end of the day, good color is what they're willing to pay for. Right? Now this also applies to you when you go to your favorite restaurant. And why it's your favorite restaurant. You go to that favorite restaurant for the service and the support, but you also go to that restaurant because you love the flavor, right? Have you ever gone to your favorite restaurant and it's got the owner, go in there, and the flavor's different, right? Well, that's what color is for people who buy signage, especially if they buy prints. The color experience for them is the flavor. They'll come back to you if you get the color to their satisfaction. And you don't have to spend money getting it better than they want. So if you think about improving the color in your shop and how much you want to spend. What's the investment? This is really about ROI. How much money are you wasting in time and material on bad color? And how much are you willing to invest in time and money in order to solve some of these problems? So good color really starts with the customer and that color experience, right? So we need to communicate more with our customers about color before we let them walk out the door, right? Here's some examples of that. Okay, here's some questions I recommend you ask. These are some example prints, right? So there's a couple of things to look for in prints. One is memory colors. If you've got a print of bananas, we all know what the color bananas are, right? You ever get a print with fruit in it, chances are the customer wants that fruit to look like real fruit. Unfortunately, sometimes you get scans and bananas are green. The customer wants them yellow. That's a challenge. So I'm just assuming that this is going to be yellow bananas. If they come out green on you, problem. Zumba Fitness. Okay, I'm going to ask the customer 2 questions. Is that orange? Does that have to be that orange? In fact, look here. There are actually different colors here. I'd also ask, is this a logo color? If that's a logo color, what's the Pantone value? You know, get this up front from the customer. Also, sometimes you'll get something like this and you'll say, well, it just has to be a green and a red. It doesn't really matter what kind of green and red it is. And you know what? A lot of times that's true. As long as the reds are reds and the greens are greens, your customers are happy, right? You know, they're used to just having something that's green and they don't really care. So be sure and you ask these kinds of questions to your customers right up front. It'll help you down the road. Okay, so here's another example of this. So everyone talks about Coke Red. What's Coke Red? You know, when I was a kid, who here remembers Kmart? Am I aging myself? Kmart? When I was a kid, I'd go into Kmart and every single television, Magnavox, Zenith, RCA, they were all different colors. So what's the right color? Right? Remember, it goes back to that what I said before on my previous slide. Good color is what the customer is willing to pay for. So that's why it's so important to understand what the customer expects up front. So if you've got a spot color, don't just ask them the Pantone value. Get a sample swatch of that actual color. Okay? That's one thing you can consider. Okay, so here's another big thing I see happen all the time. This is so confusing for people who are starting out in sign shops. They've been doing signage for years. They buy their first inkjet printer, and they have a color in Illustrator or Corel Draw or whatever, and they print it out, and it looks like crap. And they're like, what? If you have my little desktop laser, it just seems to always work. What's the deal with these inkjet printers, right? These wide format inkjet printers. Well, a lot of it has to do with color settings. I'm not going to explain CMYK and RGB and color theory, but the basic premise is every single one of these software packages has settings for their color. And if those settings don't match in all of your software, if you're opening up your customer files in Corel and Illustrator, or they're setting them up in Illustrator and they had different settings and you bring that in, and you take it into your RIP software and it has different settings, you're not going to get the color you want. You're going to be shocked just about every single time. So the good news is this is very easy to solve. Just go into all of your software and make sure that the color management settings in every single software package are exactly the same. Seems pretty simple. I wish that we could just automate that in the software world. We can't. So you have to manually go in and make sure that you use exactly the same settings. Here are the basic standard settings. These are the default settings in quite a few of the software packages, the RIP software packages. You need to take these upstream in your workflow. It's these same ones in Corel, Adobe Illustrator. If you want to talk to me afterwards, I can explain exactly why these are the way they are. But basically, the industry recommends use sRGB as your input space. Use the Graphical 2006 coded for CMYK. If your customers have embedded profiles, you've got to check a little box in your software to use the embedded profiles. If you uncheck that, you don't get the color from the customer. Their profile that's embedded in that file. That one thing can just bite you in the butt every time. So these profiles, they simplify color because they're basically a giant lookup table of the input values you want to have and the color you actually want to see come out on your printer. It's this giant lookup table. Every CMYK value and what color you're going to get on that print. Giant lookup table. Using the right media profiles can save you a lot of ink. Here's a little dirty little secret. Some profiles, the GCR is set really high and they just do a lot of ink. And guess why they would do that? Guess why you get a profile that has a lot of ink? Because you're going to burn through a lot more ink. All right? So if you're getting profiles from other people, that's something you need to be aware of. We'll talk about that in a minute. I recommend the first place you go to for profiles is the printer manufacturer or the reseller. If you're running roll and VersaWorks, you get all profiles. But what if you want to use third-party media? So you go to media websites. The media companies also offer profiles. You have to go to those websites and find that. RIP providers also provide media profiles. And you can also build your own. That's what I would recommend, and I'll explain why. But that's kind of what I recommend, is you do your own profiles. It's really not as hard as it used to be. Okay, so everyone has this experience. You get this big file, you get a zip drive or something, you get a little stick, and it's got all these profiles on it. You download them off the internet. What are you supposed to do with this, right? It's obvious what the media name is. Next to it is the resolution, right? And then it says banner, high speed. We've got a quality here. Okay, so a couple of things. When you make a profile, when you get an ICC profile, it's only designed, it's only optimized for one specific print mode. One printer, one ink, one media, resolution, dot pattern, even the number of passes, unidirectional, bidirectional can affect output. So you can certainly use these with the right print mode. If you switch print modes, you're going to have problems. So if you get a 720 profile and you try to do a 360, you've got to get the print out in the last minute, so you just change the printer settings but use the same profile, you're going to have color problems. So I would only use profiles for the print mode you actually have. Now, I know what happens though. A lot of times you get media and you don't have a profile for it. Maybe you get a generic media, right? At a minimum, just pick a profile that's as close to the type of material. For example, if you're using if it's a banner material, make sure your profile is a banner. A lot of shops pick gloss or matte when they're printing on backlit. They pick the wrong media type for their profile because they think it looks good, but they're actually going to cause a lot of problems. It's going to be impossible to match the colors with that. So make sure that you use the right. This is the #1 issue that our tech support team at Flexi gets for color, is they're just not using the right profiles. Okay, so let's just assume for a minute you've gotten that far and you've got your profiles. Now you need to have a sample image. You need to have a test sample image. Remember, we're going for color consistency. The only way to get color consistency is to consistently print your test image and make sure that everything's okay. And this is just a spot check, right? Now, if you don't have a sample image on your own, that's okay. All RIP software comes with a sample image in the samples folder. It doesn't really matter exactly what it is. There's a couple of things you need to look for. Your test image has to have gray balance gradients. Okay, you see here on the side here? So your typical sample image will have memory colors. We all know what salmon is supposed to look like, and red peppers. We all know what ice is supposed to look like, right? We've got highlights. Flesh tones are very important. But we're going to focus right here on this part, all right? So here's the 3 things you need to look for when you have your sample image. Before you print any commercial stuff for your customers, you want to make sure that your gray balance is gray. Equal amounts of cyan, magenta, and yellow is supposed to equal gray. And on swap type inks, that ends up on your printer. This will look kind of a brownish. It's a warm gray. These are equal amounts of cyan, magenta, and yellow. Get you your warm gray. If you print this green or it's blue, you've got a problem, because your inks have to be balanced. In order to get, for example, a 50% red, 50% red is 50% magenta and 50% yellow. If I'm off in my gray balance, I'm not actually getting the 50%. I'm maybe getting 55%, and I'm not going to hit that color. So you want check your gray balance. It should be nice and brown. You should have consistent hues all the way down. If you see hue shifts here as well, that's another problem. Third one is your primaries. Most sample images will have 100% of your double combinations, like 100% magenta and yellow for red. If that looks bad, if that looks scary, if this yellow looks green, you've got a problem. The problem is probably go back, check your settings, check your profile. But I would not do any commercial work if this sample image doesn't look good. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is spot color matching. All right. This is probably the biggest challenge that sign shops have when they first start printing is how do I match my spot colors? So there's three kind of measurement devices. Obviously eyeball, right? It's free, but it's priceless actually. And you can get a lot done just by eyeballing your spot colors. There's also these really cool measurement devices that have just come out in the last couple of years. And there's one that's under $100 that's fantastic. It lets you read spot colors. It gives you the right color value, and you just put that in the software. I'm going to show you that. And then, if you're really serious about making a profit with color, you need to get a color measurement device. You can get this one on Amazon for $1,200. It's the i1 Pro. It's worth every penny of it. It will pay for itself, depending upon how many times you, how big your dumpster is at the end of every day, or how often you fill your dumpster with bad color prints. This thing can pay for itself very quickly. Okay, so if you've only got an eyeball, that's great. You can do spot color matching all day long. This is a fantastic, people have been doing this for years. It works great. What you do is you take a bunch of colors. Some of the software, some of the design software can create a palette for you. You can also sometimes, RIP software will have a full Pantone chart in their samples folder. So go to the samples folder of your RIP software. You'll find this wonderful Pantone chart. Just take it and print it up and put it on your wall. And when people that come into your shop are really, really insistent about a specific color, you just go over and pick the color. Then you use that in the software. Pretty straightforward. In fact, this is exactly how ICC profiles work. They just have a giant lookup table. Every CMYK value and its LAB color, and the same thing. So you can actually do the same thing with just printing this. The one trick is you got to print this out for every media and print mode you're actually selling. There's another cool feature that some of the RIP software have come out with. This is included in FlexiSign, but some of the other RIPs have this as well now. And it's a spot color matching tool built into the software. So what you do is you pick a color, an LEB value you want to hit or CMYK value, and the RIP automatically prints an XY chart. So our actual color, I think the color we pick is like right here, and then there's combinations. What you do is you take your customer's spot color that they have, get a hole puncher, punch a hole in their color, and you just move it across here. And you look until the hole that you punched in their color matches the patch. And in the RIP software, you just enter in the X and Y, and there you go. You don't need to know anything else about color. You just use your eyeball and just pick the colors that match. This is called Battleship Color. Color Battleship. Okay, now another easy way is getting one of these devices. This is Colorcaster's version. I highly recommend it. Every shop I think should have this. It's a little device, works with your mobile phone. You click on a color and it tells you the LEB value. If your customer's got spot colors, you just put all of those in the file, or whatever. The best way to match colors is to actually have a color, a visual color from the customer, because that's the color that's in their mind. That's the color they want to see. So what you want to do is read that color. You can also read multiple colors, and then you put those in the software, and then it will just automatically match those spot colors.